Hello guys, welcome to another incredible game that literally just ended from the US Chess Championship. It is kind of difficult to make this video now, even if I had planned to make it long before. One more time, condolences to Daniel Naroditsky's family. I'm sure all of you would have found out about the news by now. I wonder what was going through the minds of these players as they were actually playing. I think I learned they actually knew about the news, so I wonder if this news would have affected some of the players. I'm not sure, but maybe. But this was an incredible game. Hans was coming into this game with 4 out of 7, more than 50%. And the Woodward was at 3 out of 7. He has no shot of winning the US Championship at this point. But now, after this game especially, no more does Hans either. But we'll jump into the game. It's like a Queen's Gambit decline that started looking like a London. When you see the position, you see what I'm talking about. And there's a move that happened in this game that even the commentators were wowed by it. And they opened with d4. We get knight f6. We get knight f3. We get e6 here. He plays c4 and d5. Now we have this Queen's Gambit decline-like position. Knight comes to c4 and knight b d7. And he develops his bishop here to f5, or f4 rather. And Hans brings his bishop to b4. You notice that it looks like a Nimzo Indian in a way, except that we have a knight on d7 already. And we have this bishop that is already on f4 as well. Now, that looks like London. Right? If you play e6, e3 here, you basically get something that looks like a London. Andy takes, and plays e6, and we have this London-esque structure here. Hans lashes out with c5, and he develops the bishop to d3. He plays c4, bishop comes back to c2 like you would have in the London. Queen comes to a5 and Andy castles here. It looks like you can take and win a free pawn, but no, you're not winning a free pawn. If you take here and you win what looks like a free pawn, all of a sudden the bishop lands on d6 and you are not going to castle. This king will have to run. White is going to play a4. Your queen will have to run. This queen will come here. You'll just be in a lot of trouble if this was to happen in the game. So of course Hans is not going to do that. After Andy castles, Hans castles first, gets his king away from the center. Andy goes a4 and Hans plays a6. The knight moves into the position e5 and Hans decides to grab the pawn. So far the game has been pretty balanced, but after taking this pawn, it is not balanced anymore. Hans grabs the free pawn and Andy trades the knight off on this square. Knight takes, bishop takes. Notice that that pawn is now undefended. So Andy brings his bishop or his queen to b1, lining up this battery against the h7 pawn, but also attacking the pawn on b7. Now, there's a subtle thing here. If you do nothing, let's say Hans does nothing, this queen is going to run out of squares. If a5 happens, where is your queen going? How is your queen getting out of this position? So Hans moves the queen immediately out of the position. Andy grabs the pawn, takes back, basically wins the pawn back. And Hans plays this move, rook to c8. Andy brings his rook to b1. You may be wondering, wait a second, what about that? Don't forget the bishop is over here. So if you bring your rook to b8, you'll just be donating a rook, right? And Andy will be very happy. Hans brings the queen back into the position. Notice what has happened here, you guys. This queen has moved, well, it moved like that first. It moved like that. It took a pawn, it ran back out, and now it's back again on the same square. So Andy brought back the queen to trade. Hans says, no, not so soon. I want to trade on my own terms. You take, I will take with my knight, and I'll have this knight in your position, threatening, maybe you come here, hit the rook. If the rook moves, you can get a fork, win the bishop. And Andy decides, okay, you know what? I'm not trading the queen anymore. Once again, notice the yo-yo of the queen. This queen has moved along this d8, a5, c3 diagonal multiple times now. And Andy decides to put his rook in the position, attacks the bishop. Bishop moves, rook steps back, and Hans plays the move c3. An inaccuracy in this position. The position is now a little more balanced. It's not as winning as it was before. Andy goes for b3. Hans steps back with the bishop. Andy doubles the rooks on the third rank. I'm not sure why he played that move, but that is actually the best move in the position. Hans goes here with the pawn, attacks the bishop. I'm guessing he wants to win that bishop, and he steps back, and we have rook to c6. Bishop takes. Now the pawn is undefended, and the Woodward wins the pawn on c3. So now, from Hans grabbing a free pawn, and the Woodward is now up a pawn in this position. He doubles up, rook takes, and queen slides over to d1, putting an eye on that pawn so that you can move the rook maybe, or so that even if this rook moves, you will have two defenders on the pawn when black will have two attackers. So Hans goes for bishop to g4, attacking the queen, essentially saying, hey, if you take the queen, you're going to get mated, right? This will be very embarrassing. This will be very embarrassing. You can even be mated this way as well. So you can't, obviously you can't take the bishop. So Andy blocks that, kicks the bishop out, and then plays h3 in this position, making sure that the bishop can't come here, but the pawn also cannot come. You can't advance that pawn to try to disorganize the king side here. Hans plays queen d5 in this position. It's kind of curious what the queen does here. Andy now closes it up completely with this move, f4. Okay, now, when I saw f4, I wasn't sure what was... Wait. f4. Great move. f4 basically locks everything down here and says, look, if you take, I'm going to take with the bishop, right? You're never attacking my king. So any attacking chances that white may have is essentially gone after this move f4. If anybody is going to win this game, that black may have rather. If anybody is going to win this game, it's only going to be white here. And Hans started making advances. I'm not sure if it would have been okay for, I guess h6 is the best move here. Computer says he can also play queen d6, basically step back and then threaten to take, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, Hans plays the best move, h6, but it's already a lot in the position. We have king coming to g7 here, and moment of truth, and the Woodward puts his rook on the back rank. Now, when you look at that move, you go, wait, you're not going to mate him from behind, right? Because, well, there's a rook cannot mate a king by itself. That's number one. And how is this queen coming here? You're not planning to put your queen on a1. Your pawn is in the way, is blockaded. What exactly is the idea behind going rook b8 here? When you find the grandmaster and the Woodward, or any grandmaster, because grandmasters understand these things very well, you can maybe ask him. But in this position, Hans Niemann played the move queen to d6. And do you see it? Queen d6. When I was watching this game, at first, nobody knew what was happening. The commentators were looking at the position like, wait, can't you just take the pawn? No. It looks like a discovered attack, but the bishop is undefended. So you cannot take this pawn with a discovery. The queen attacks the rook. So what is the best move in this position? And the Woodward finds it. And when that move happened, everybody, Yasser Serwan and all the commentators on the channel basically just said, okay, there's no way Hans is coming back from this. And that brilliant move was d5. d5. And the Woodward says, you know what? Take my rook. I will take your rook. But I will have a pawn on c6. I will have a pawn on c6. The queen is coming to d4 or even a1 on this diagonal against the king. There's that check right there. And I'm going to take here eventually, maybe move the king, take on this square, open up this diagonal for the bishop, move the pawn all the way to c7, and you are not going to be able to survive this. That was basically what happened there, right? And so Hans Niemann in this position, okay, you can take the rook, allow Andy Woodward take your rook. Hans Niemann decides that the best move to play in this position was f6. Hans goes f6. Well, f6 is something, I guess. You are saying, okay, you take my rook, I will take your rook back, maybe. Well, you can't even well, okay, if you take, later on I'll take the rook. If you take my rook now, I will take your queen because the pawn is pinned. The commentators were considering, instead of f6, going for rook to c5 here, hitting the pawn. But ultimately, this was what Hans decided to play. There was nothing he could do at this point, I thought, anyway. And now, Andy did not do anything about the rooks. He did nothing about the rooks. He played the move king to h2. And believe it or not, king h2 or king f2 were the two best moves in the position. When you see king h2, you know, okay, you know what? Now I'm going to take this pawn, right? It doesn't even matter. If you take my rook now, it may not matter too much. Because although this actually doesn't work, you can take here with check. No, you can't take with check. Wait, if you take now, what happens? Wait, what move does black play here? Because this opens up an attack on the queen, but black has a move. Black can play queen d8 here. And it doesn't matter. You still can't take the rook. Ooh, look at that. Look at that. So very easy to make a mistake in this position. I can bet you if I was playing a blitz game and we get a position like this, I'll probably take here and lose the game. But none of that happened in the game. Andy goes king h2, and Hans Niemann in this position played queen takes b8. He takes the rook, and Andy captured the rook here. Now, that pawn we were talking about on c6 ultimately ended up on c6, meaning Hans would have just done all of this before without playing f6 maybe. And Andy goes here to capture the pawn. The queen comes in to defend the pawn. Now you basically have check, advance the pawn. You can take here. The bishop controls that diagonal. I mean, I knew this, there's no way, right? Even if it's opposite color bishops, if you trade queens here with a pawn that is potentially going to be on c7, it's probably going to be impossible for black to defend this position. But Hans is going to try. That's why he's a great player. Hans goes for g4, and he takes, and check with the king. The queen captures the pawn here. Now you are down the pawn already, and he moves the queen, defending that pawn. Queen comes in, offering a trade of queen. Hans offered the trade of queens. I think maybe if he kept the queen on the board, but it's difficult. What do you do here, right? You look at this position, you're thinking to yourself, there's opposite colored bishops. Even if I'm down a pawn or two, opposite colored bishop endgames are typically drawn. Maybe I can draw this game. But Hans decides to trade the queens, and once the queens came off, we had takes here, there was nothing more. King h3. What do you play here? There's no reasonable discovery. The king is just going to match, probably win this pawn or something. And the pawn advances to c7. Notice everything here. That pawn is on a dark square. This pawn is on a light square, but it's difficult to exploit it. If you have to defend against the pawn queening, if you go after this pawn, you just make a queen and you even lose the bishop as well. That wouldn't make any sense. So you have to go and prevent the pawn from queening. So Hans goes bishop e6 here. Now that pawn is going to remain there throughout this game. The king starts moving upward. The king comes in, stopping the white king from taking this pawn here, and then he reroutes his bishop. Hans pushes the pawn to h5. At this point, I think he was just making moves because you can't just give up and throw in the tower just like that. And Andy reroutes his bishop as well. Anchors the bishop on e5, where it holds that pawn, holds this pawn, and this bishop is just only going to stay on this diagonal. It does not matter that this pawn is on a light square. You cannot go after this pawn. You don't have time for that. So Hans just goes back and forth with the bishop, and then Andy moved his king. You can't take the pawn. If you take the pawn, he makes a queen. So he moves, he brings the king, the other pawn starts matching. Andy grabs the pawn now because, well, the king is defending the square, but it's not enough. Or rather, Hans grabs the pawn because the king is now defending the square, but it's not enough because we have two pawns now, according to Hikaru, the white peoples. And the Woodward made a queen. Once you see this check, what are you going to do? You're going to take, and then we are going to get f7 here. So in this position, after Andy Woodward brought in the first queen into the game, Hans Niemann resigned the game because there's nothing more you can do in this position. If you take the queen, I'm just going to push here. You're not in time. You're going to lose for sure. And yes, you guys, with this now, and the Woodward gets up to 50%. This is incredible. If you remember, Andy Woodward was the junior chess champion in the US. He won the junior chess championships, and that's how he qualified into this position. So playing and being 50% against the top of the best of the best, essentially in the US, Hans Niemann, Levon Aronian, Fabiano Caruana, Wesley So in this tournament, and being at 50% is an incredible feat. And I hope he continues to be a great player. For now, he has put a stop to any aspiration that Hans Niemann has, at least 2025, of being the US chess champion this year. We still have people running for it. I think Fabiano Caruana is probably going to win. I don't know. If I was to guess right now, it's looking very likely that Fabiano is going to be the US chess champion. But we have other players that are doing great as well, and we are going to see some of those games. Stay tuned. If you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure you smash that subscribe button. And once again, before I leave, our condolences to the family of Daniel Naroditsky. I hope that they have the energy in this time to face this loss. If you're thinking of what you can do, remember all the great games and all the great lessons you learned watching Daniel on YouTube. Some of us got into chess or became as good as we are in chess simply because people like Daniel made the contribution. So thank you, everybody. Subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you in the next one.